This video number 2, and Roger and I have taken a break and we're back, and we're going to pick up in Roger's life as he is starting to transition from playing music full-time into doing some truck driving, and then there's some insurance, life insurance discussions that we're going to have. Oh boy, I bet nobody knew that Roger Smith was into selling life insurance, and we'll touch on that. And then the transition from the late 50s into the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and as we move forward in the history of Roger Smith's life. So, Roger, let's talk a little bit about some of the transitional experiences in life as you were moving into doing some truck driving, and then into the early 1960s, and as you started to give some musical lessons to people within the central Indiana area. So I'll let you pick it up from there.
Well, I started giving lessons in '55.
Okay.
Little Osby Smith, he had students there in Newcastle, and he wanted me to take over his students and teach them, and so that's what got me started teaching guitar, banjo, fiddle,
right,
mandolin,
mm-hmm.
and then from the playing the taverns in Anderson, Muncie, I had a brother that was hauling livestock out of Galax, Virginia, and he talked me into joining him with this company, and I hauled some livestock all into New York from Lafayette. I did that. That was a real nice, clean, healthy.
Yeah, especially for a guy who's, forever in recovery from tuberculosis, right?
When you get a load of stinking hogs on, you really in the healthy part of things.
Well, it motivated you to get to the destination to get rid of them, I assume, yeah.
Yes, that's the case, but truck some there. Truck some for a brother of mine too that hauled lumber out of Lynchburg, Virginia.
All right.
To up east, like to Connecticut and places like that.
So you would leave Columbus and drive down there to...
Well, I moved down there. I moved down to Lynchburg.
Okay.
To work with him.
In what year?
That'd have been in '57, I believe.
Okay.
And then I moved back to Indiana because a guy got me a job of hauling oil to make roofing at Fry Roofing in Brookville.
Okay.
And we were hauling the oil out of Newark, Ohio. I did that, I don't know, for a year or better. And when I got fired from that job, I went, hey, I'm not kidding.
Were you happy to be released from that job?
Well, no, that was a pretty good job. But what got me fired was another guy told the boss, he had told the boss that somebody had, that I had told him how to set the fuel up on the truck. And I did tell him, but I didn't do it for him.
Right.
So they fired me for that, which it doesn't make any difference.
Life
But I said
on.
There's another job.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, then I hauled some for Bunzendahl down at Connersville.
Mm-hmm.
And went from that to, I got fired there. And my buddy hit an underpass in Chicago, and I got fired for it.
That's that's probably a whole story within itself.
Yeah. So I got fired twice in less than a year. But that's okay. Then I moved from Connorsville to Columbus and started driving for Leroy Moore
Okay, right.
with a dump truck.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for him about a year.
Now you were living out of Jewel Village at the time.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. I had a house trailer.
Yes, because that's where our lives crossed
Right,
when I was about 10 and a half, 11 years old.
right. But mainly, did I own the house on 31 when you
No, you had not bought the house.
you started taking lessons
Right.
there at the trailer?
Yes. Right.
Okay. Anyways,
So had you started with liquid transport at that point in time?
well, I was driving for Leroy Moore, and this guy was driving for a guy, a broker at Liquid Transport. He had
Yes.
as a broker had his truck leased there,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew him from driving a dump truck there at
Right.
Mesh Burgers.
Okay.
So he's the one that got me a job at Liquid Transport,
All right.
and I stuck with Liquid Transport, I don't know, for about 25 years.
Yes. Yeah, because that was a long tenure
Yeah,
relationship that you had developed.
but I played some music for Bill Monroe
Right.
in between
Yes.
all this too.
Right. In the early 1960s, house band at Bean Blossom started to evolve into a period of time where there was Jim Basir playing bass, Neil Rosenberg, who was at Bloomington working on his master's degree,
Right?
Vernon McQueen from here in Connorsville, and also Osby, who I assume was living in Newcastle, continuing
Yeah.
to live in Newcastle at that time. And then you guys would come and play on Sundays as part of the house band when both Birch was managing, then for a period of time where for about a year when the Bryan County Music Corporation, which you were part of, and my father was part of, Jim Piva,
Yeah.
and also C.D. McClary, you were playing house band work with that group during that time frame, and then later when I believe Birch probably then took back and assumed control of managing for the Sunday shows. Now
Right.
this was all before the festival came along in 1967 at Bean Blossom.
Yeah.
But in that time frame, share with me, with all of us, some of the people that you were giving lessons to, either during the week or on weekends, and then how music was still active part of your life in the early 60s up through probably 1965, 66, 67.
Yeah, well, let's see, I was given lessons to Frank Neat,
Yes. He was living in
Dave
Edinburgh.
Hedrick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gary
that's true.
Hedrick,
Roger Bannister.
who's the banjo picker that died there at Edinburgh.
Ronnie Carnes.
Ronnie Carnes, I was giving Ronnie Carnes banjo lessons.
Dennis Markham.
Dennis Markham, Roger Bannister.
Was Louis Popejoy coming over? And,
Yeah, Pope Joy
Yeah,
was
things-
coming over
right.
from Brazil or Terre Haute.
yeah. Lee Ray Smith out of Bryan County for a period of time.
Yeah. Fiddle lessons for Glenn Duncan.
Yeah, Glenn,
They
completely unique talent.
There's not too many people knows that Glenn took lessons from Roger Smith.
Yes. Did you see that kind of talent almost immediately in Glenn?
Yes, but Glenn had a golden opportunity to learn to play.
Mm-hmm.
when he graduated from school, he told his dad, he said, if you'll let me stay home and practice the fiddle, I'll practice it like I was going to work in a factory.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That was the commitment the two
He
of them
said,
had
I'll
to each
practice
other.
8 hours a day.
Right.
And I thought, that'll get the job done.
That would have probably been, what, 64 or 1965, because Glenn's a few years younger than Roger Bannister and Gary and myself.
Well, really, it would have to be a little later than that, because I didn't buy that house over there on 46 until
Taylorsville.
72.
Okay.
And he was coming there for lessons.
Okay.
He didn't start when
Mhm.
I lived on 46.
Right. Right.
I remember very well when he walked up to the house and wanted to know if I would give him lessons.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him what he was trying to learn by, and he held up a All in the Way album.
Yeah, Old and in the Way. Right.
Old and in the Way.
Yeah. Listen to Vassar Clements.
Vassar Clements.
Yeah, playing
And I
the
thought
style.
to myself, boy, if you can learn from that,
Mm-hmm.
because that would be hard stuff to learn.
Right.
Anyways, yeah, I could tell that he was going to do good because
Drive and talent.
well, they say what will work for you to be the best in learning to play.
Mm-hmm.
And as Earl Scruggs says, the 3 P's.
Mm-hmm.
Practice, practice, practice.
A little more practice.
That's right.
Yes.
And that's what it takes,
Right.
practice. And the more practice you do, and the more that you do all at once,
Mm-hmm.
is good. If you break it up, it don't do you as much good as it does if you continue for an hour
Right.
and then break, and do it another hour or 2 hours. And if he did like he told his dad he would do,
Right.
he was going to practice 8 hours a day.
Right.
That's a lot of practice.
Yeah. Now, at the same time, while that in central Indiana, there was a certain level of exposure that all of us had to Larry McNeely up in
Right?
up in Lafayette,
Lafayette.
and Larry was really forging forward. Much, I would guess, much like, because I've never sit and spent time talking to Larry, but he was a very motivated and driven individual when he was in that 13, 14, 15-year-old time frame where he was spending a lot of time just by himself, literally listening and going back and reinforcing, what he had heard with his own approach to what was influencing him. In the 60s, as you were doing house band work and then moving into the world of some of the early festivals that Monroe was putting on, and Bill was doing much less in the late 60s in terms of putting regular weekly shows on with Birch running those shows, how did you in your music start to spend your weekends when you weren't playing at Bean Blossom in the mid to late 60s?
Well, I remember after going to work at Liquid Transport, go to Bean Blossom on the weekend because
Yes.
we didn't haul all that much on the weekend. So that's where we would go, and if they needed some music, why,
Mm-hmm.
we were always available to jump in and help.
While you were playing with Vernon and Osby and in that setting, how did some of the Eastern Indiana influence as you started to meet some of the people like Marvin Davis and others that later, as you were playing with the Kentucky Gentlemen, how did that transition start to occur in your musical contacts and your musical exposure? Because I assume that was starting in what, the early mid 1970s.
You know, I don't remember when that started.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll probably start to, as we move forward, some of this may start to come back, okay, in terms of how that transition away from Bean Blossom and some of the things that you were doing musically that weren't so much tied, because you had spent the time also later in life, into the 70s and 80s, going and playing some with Monroe, but also doing some bus driving for Bill after you retired from Liquid Transport.
Yeah.
What year would you have officially retired from Liquid?
Well, I retired from Liquid in '85.
Okay.
But I went down and drove Bill's bus before I retired.
Okay.
I wanted to see if that'd be something that I wanted to do after I retired.
All right.
But I found out that I didn't.
Right. What was some of the experiences that you went through when you were doing some of the bus driving for Monroe at that time? You know, how was his music changing, and what were some of your observations about music as it was changing in that time frame?
Well, Bill was getting much older,
Yes.
and he was changing quite a bit, really.
Mm-hmm.
I remember working for him in '56, and he was a fine guy to work for.
Mm-hmm.
And he still was a fine guy to work for, but he had a circulation problem that kind of changed his
Yeah, with the heart attack and
with the talk that he did to the boys.
Yes, wasn't the same
Yeah, once in a while
person.
he'd chew on them a little bit. Well, he would do that. I remember Joe Stewart coming in with dirty clothes on to put on a show
Mm-hmm.
at Bean Blossom.
Yes.
And Bill chewed on him too,
Mm-hmm.
to go change clothes and get into something decent.
As you, in the 50s and 60s, and then, you know, clearly in the 70s and 80s, musical instruments, buying and selling, has always been part of the makeup of your musical influence. In fact, as we're sitting here in this particular room, you have quite a few Gibson banjos, multiple different fiddles that you've acquired, and some guitars. How had your relationship with Happy Smith and Larry Richardson influenced some of the early musical instruments that were being secured down there and then brought up here, and then found their way through you into certain people? I know my father in the early 60s purchased a Gibson archtop banjo I played for a number of years while we were taking lessons, and later that I played. How did that start to evolve in the relationship that you had with people in North Carolina?
Well, buying and selling instruments has gone along with teaching as well as playing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, trying to make a living, you do what you have to do and you always tried to keep something for sale at all times, which if you can make a few bucks that way,
Right.
it helps buy that other hot dog.
Mm-hmm.
And we need quite a few hot dogs.
Yeah, right, absolutely. You were mentioning Frank Neaton and how you'd started to give him lessons, and then, you know, as Frank was starting to build banjo nicks, and there were conversion banjos that Frank was starting to build nicks for you because you were acquiring these archtops as tenors, and it put Frank to work when he was still living in Indiana, and even later when he moved down to Dunville, Kentucky, and then later on over to Russell Springs. But probably your first necks that Frank built for you would have been, what, 1967, 68, 69, when Frank first started building necks?
Could be,
Mm-hmm.
because what I would do, I would buy banjos out of Highland, Indiana, from
Okay.
a guy,
Yes.
and turn them over to Frank. They'd be tenors or plectrums, and he'd put 5-string necks in them. And I don't know, he's probably made 40 to 60 necks for me.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yes, it is amazing. I remember I bought a 6 that he wanted a 6 real bad, and I told him if he'd make me 10 necks, I'd just give him the 6.
Okay. All right.
And that's the way we did that.
So we worked it out over a period of time then.
And I was down in West Virginia. Went to Athens. Jim Hypes took me to Athens, and I bought enough parts to make 16 banjos out of. I'm talking about the metal.
Right.
What Frank had to do was make the neck, and was there anything else? No, all the metal I bought.
Mm-hmm.
I bought all the metal down there to make 16 banjos. So he put it together.
Right.
He had to come up with the shell.
Mm-hmm.
I might have even down bought the shell too. I'm not sure.
Right.
But he put them together, and we split them.
Okay.
We was talking about that down to Bean Blossom Festival this weekend.
Just last weekend.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we was talking about
Yeah, how people's lives in both the music and in the instruments, and how once you start to develop those relationships, how they actually stay together, 40 and 50 years later.
right.
Because you're still seeing people that, you've been around, and it's been good because your talent to play and your desire to continue to deal with instruments now that you're in your mid 80s has been something that's just been consistent, and it's transcended those 50 or 60 years now of relationships with people. And few people
Yeah.
can say that.
Well, music opens so many doors for you if you want. If you want to challenge it,
Right.
And I like to meet people
Right.
because there's where you get your information.
Right. Now, as you were then transitioning from full-time truck driving to doing some part-time truck driving, ultimately to retiring from liquid transport, and a new part of your life started to open up as you met Alice, and who you're married to now, living here in Milton, Indiana. And that transition into her world with her children and now grandchildren. As you were making that transition and moving more into the world of Eastern Indiana, we started to touch a little bit on the Kentucky Gentleman and the Gabbards and others. Talk a little bit about that transition into music as you were playing quite a bit more in Eastern Indiana.
Well, I started out working with the Kentucky Gentlemen. They hired me just to play fiddle
Okay.
because they had Ralph King on banjo and Avery Gabbard on bass. And, trying to think of the guy that was a guitar picker at that time.
Was Dennis Barrett part of that?
Barrett and
Right. And then Marvin
Davis
right.
was mandolin picker.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the band at that particular time. And then the Dennis, he quit, and Marvin took over the guitar work,
All right.
and they didn't hire no mandolin player.
Now, were you
At
playing
that time.
quite a bit in the Connorsville area? Because I know as I got older and was playing with Talmadge Law and also for a couple of years with Lou and Jan Snyder, we run across each other as you were out playing with the Kentucky Gentlemen at festivals as far north as Milan, Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah, we played all over Michigan and Illinois, Ohio.
Yeah.
We went as far as Tottenham, Canada.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So during the time that I was playing with them, we cut 9 albums.
There were that many.
Yeah.
Because they always had a strong vocal presence,
Right.
along with you on the fiddle, and then later playing some banjo with them also.
Well, they hired when they took me into the band as part of the band. I worked for them for I don't know how many years, but when I went in as part of the band, Harold Russell
Yes.
went in as. In other words, we were 1/5 of the group,
Mm-hmm.
so we made up 2 parts of the. In other words, we split everything 5
Yes.
ways.
Okay.
So the banjo picker, he quit, who was Ralph King.
Yes.
He quit. They decided they'd use me on fiddle and banjo,
Mm-hmm.
but I was mostly used as a banjo picker. The fiddle wasn't used very much.
All right. Now, were you playing, as you had mentioned, you went out at a distance, but were you playing on a pretty regular basis in and around Connorsville and Brookville and Richmond in that particular area?
Yeah, we stayed booked up quite a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you always playing as much as you wanted, or would you have, in that time frame as you were in now, moving into your 60s and 70s, and you had a little more time on available to you, would you, at that point in time, wanted to have played more if it was available, or was it about right for the time and the energy that you had to put into the music?
Well, until I retired from liquid transport, I didn't care to play very much other than just on the weekends.
Right.
But you get tired of running the road
All right.
and then running the road some more on the weekend.
Yes.
But I at least could take Alice along with me on the weekend.
Yes.
Couldn't do that through the week.
Right.
But she's been a big part in my life, and I've been the happiest since she's given me
Yeah.
30 good years.
Yeah. Has it been 30 years
It's
now?
been 30 years, yeah.
She is a unique person in that everybody who I believe has ever met her, she is that kind of personality that you just instantly like the person and you understand the positive influences
She never changes.
that has been so instrumental in my observation to you is that you've been a much easier and a much better and more rounded person because of the time that you've been with her.
Yeah, because you remember how I used to be one.
No, I want to forget some of that. But you were a person, Roger, who has never drawn any quarters, okay? This is the way it is. You've been your own man, and for all of us that have been around you, we've seen some people would say it's mellowed, but I say it's a more well-rounded person at this point in your life, and you've always seemed to be, much happier and in that world that we've
Well,
seen.
that Alice is because of that.
I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
Now, back about 7 or 8 years ago, the Stoney Lonesome band started to play at Madison, Indiana, and that's where you and I came and was reintroduced into your world, doing some banjo work with you, with Osby and Vernon, Stanley Brock, but there were others like Roger Bannister and Bill Bannister and Denise Koser that would come down and fill in and play. But you and Osby have been pretty constant every first Saturday night down in the world of Madison, Indiana, as you've played down there. In fact, a few months ago, you were presented an award for the 7 or 8 now 9 years that you've been coming down there on weekends to play. How has that experience here in your early to mid 80s been for you, as you and Osby have continued on in presenting music to people who have been coming down to?
You mean because some of them quit?
Sure. Well, no, I think we all know the people within bluegrass music are never forever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
None of us are forever in that world. But how has your relationship with Glenn Osby Smith been over that time frame, and the continuation even now as both of you are in your early to mid 80s in your desire to continue to play?
Well, little Osby Smith, I met him in '55. And since 1955, he has been a gentleman to me throughout all these years. And if he'd call me and say, Roger, you got a little money that I could borrow? I'd say, yes, sir, I sure have. When do you want it? I'll bring it to you.
Friendships that have lasted a lifetime.
Well, that's the kind of friend he's been to me, so I'd sure take it to him.
Right.
Because he's been good to me, and I'm going to stick with him as long as I live.
There you go. Friendships that last lifetimes.
That's right.
Now, as you've gone to Bee Blossom and you bring your motor home in both for fall and also spring festival, and you've been asked by Dwight Dillman and called upon, to do some fiddle workshops and give a little perspective of literally now close to 55, 60 years in the world of Bean Blossom. How has coming back to Bean Blossom, both spring and fall, been part of your musical life here over the last 8-10 years?
Well, I talked to Dwight here at the old Milton School. The first time that I had met him.
Okay.
After he bought the place.
Yes.
And we talked about, he played for Bill and I played for Bill, so we talked a little bit about that. And I told him I had been associated with Brown County Jamboree since 1955. And I said, if you want to make a deal with me, I won't charge you to play if you don't charge me to get in.
Uh-huh.
So that's the deal we struck there and
Sure.
shook hands on it. And
Right.
that's the way it's been. So I've done work for him, and he doesn't charge me to go in.
Sure. Yeah. Good relationship, because once again you're one of the people that are part of the history, truly part of the history of Bean Blossom.
Yes, I've been pretty faithful to Bean Blossom.
Yes. Now, let's talk a little bit about your life in general, the last 5, 10 years away from music itself, okay? And some of the things that have made up your life here with Alice and her kids and grandkids here within the area in and around Connorsville and Milton, Indiana.
Yeah, well, you tell me what you want to know, and I'll see if I can spill it.
Well, some of the maybe some of the activities that have gone on that the two of you have participated in with those the kids and the grandkids.
Well,
Giving lessons to
I've
a couple of them, right?
Taught one of the boys. She's got two grandsons. One's I think 23, and the other one's he's about 20.
Mm-hmm.
They're both in college. Matt doesn't care to play
Right.
music. Joe, he was interested in the guitar, so I started teaching him. Now I bought him a new. Trying to think of the name of the guitar. It's the one that tried to take over the Martin. Melvin Goins advertised for him.
Okay. That had gotten involved in some lawsuits about copying some of Martin's specific
Yeah, but
look
what's
and
the name
design.
of the guitar?
Boy, I'll have to think about that one. Alvarez,
No, the Navajo is.
Takamine, or
No.
others.
Wasn't an old.
Well, there's a few people that'll be watching this video in the future that'll say immediately, because they'll know immediately what we're talking
Well,
about.
anyways, I bought him.
Right.
I bought him a new guitar, and it tickled him to death.
Yeah, that's great.
And he learned to play it, but then he decided he wanted to stop. So
Mm-hmm.
we stopped.
Right.
I don't know if he'll pick it back up,
Right.
but if he decides to,
Yeah.
he can.
And let's talk a little bit about some of the people that you're giving lessons to presently. I know that as I came here this afternoon, you were spending some time with a fella who is new to taking lessons from you, and I think he was of the young age. He's one of the younger people that you've been giving lessons to. I think he's 72,
72, that's right.
coming from 2 hours away,
Right.
very specifically to come and start to look at and learn some of your approach to giving banjo lessons. As I sit here, Roger, it takes me back to when I was about 10 and a half or 11 years old, as we
Right.
were sitting here talking with Mr. Carter.
Yeah, well, old Fred, he's a fine gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
We belong to the same
Yeah.
lodge,
Sure.
and he's, I don't know, how far would you say it is over to 75 miles?
Yeah, easily.
Okay.
Yeah, 75, 80, maybe
But
even a little
as I
further.
told you, I've had them to come as far west as west of Chicago.
Yeah, Gail Rudisill,
Gail Rusa,
right, who's now teaching full time.
she's supposed to be teaching 75.
You know,
uh,
now down in
Nashville,
Nashville, right?
Nashville, Tennessee.
You bet.
And
Now you're going to be giving lessons tomorrow. What, to two or three different people?
I'm working right now with my heart doctor.
Okay,
That
right. Out of what, Newcastle?
Pardon me?
Is he out of Newcastle?
No, he's out of Richmond.
Out of Richmond. Okay.
And he's put a couple of stents in me.
Uh-huh.
And he's a very nice gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
Real humble.
Right.
He has muscle problems in his legs, and it's a chore for him to walk
Oh, dear.
and keep these muscles
Right.
to where he can walk. And I'm also teaching the pharmacists that works in the hospital
Okay.
there. He's 23. He's taking fiddle and banjo at the same time, both.
Must be
Oh, he's
a
talented.
real talent.
He's talented.
Right.
And I'm teaching the doctor guitar and banjo.
There's something about healthcare people and bluegrass music and taking lessons that
Yeah.
you found yourself a niche of people there.
And then I'm teaching a preacher out of Kentucky.
Oh, that's a whole nother story, right?
He comes from, he's about 30 minutes or 40 from where we play music on the first Saturday
Yes.
of every month down to
Right.
Fairgrounds.
So he's just across the river there, across the Ohio River.
Yeah, but,
Right.
and let's see, who else is taking lessons? Maybe I need to take some myself.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
But I've been doing this as long, Lord. But it's been good.
Right.
And that opens up more doors, see?
Yeah, because word of mouth and relationships
Giving
and
lessons.
leads to meeting new people and cementing relationships with people that have been part of your life.
And I got Potter off coming.
Right.
Forgot about him.
Mm-hmm. So you got what, 5, 6, 7, 8 different
Yeah.
students on and off now?
Yes, sir.
Right. That's good. That's great.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do right now, Roger, is that we're going to take a break, and either today or I'm going to come back, and we're going to spend a little time on the next video, and we're going to just dwell a bit on style of fiddle and style of banjo, because there are things that you're doing and do in the world of bluegrass fiddle and in the world of bluegrass banjo that are not going to be duplicated today or at any point in the future, because the influences of what you have picked up on and learned, others are never going to approach it the same way, because their influences today are dramatically different than your influences. And so what I'd like to do is be able to spend some minutes with you playing certain songs and certain passages that will be both fiddle and banjo influenced, that we'll talk about a little more in depth when we ultimately come back with another video.
Now, what you just got through saying is I'm a dyed-in-the-wool bluegrass picker and fiddle player.
Absolutely correct.
That's right. I have made it my business to stay that way
Mm-hmm.
throughout my entire life,
Right.
because I've had the opportunity to go with different things if I wanted to, like the chromatic and
Mm-hmm.
the Don Reno style. And there's nothing wrong with these styles, but I can't, if I start mixing up this stuff, it's going to change my picking altogether. That's the reason I don't do it.
Sure. Right. And that's what I want to be able to show some people, okay, who are really interested in getting into some of the real specifics and some of the real details of what made, your approach and some of the influences of your approach to the Earl Scruggs direction, because I want to be able to touch on some of that. So we're going to take a break, but we'll be
Okay.
back.